Motherwell's Player of the Year, Motherwell's Young Player of the Year, Coaches Player of the Year, Scottish Football Writers Young Player of the Year, PFA Young Player of the Year, and Motherwell's youngest ever captain. So who is this 18-year-old that clubs around Europe are after this summer? And that man is Lennon Miller. He made his Scottish Premiership debut at just 16, and since then he has made over 75 appearances with just under 6,000 minutes to his name in senior football. Miller turns 19 in August, and as I mentioned in the intro, he has clubs around Europe tracking him. Celtic and Rangers have both been credited with interest, and they'd be two clubs keen to keep this young Scottish talent in his homeland, although there are clubs in England looking at him too: Liverpool, Newcastle, Aston Villa and Bournemouth. Clubs in France, Strasbourg and Lyon. Strasbourg, of course, with that Chelsea connection. They do love collecting wonder kids, it seems, and could Lennon Miller be the next one? And in Germany, Borussia Dortmund are also after the Motherwell man, of course signing Joe Bellingham this summer, having his brother Jude previously. They seem to have a bit of a knack for signing young midfielders. Now, it probably would have been easier to mention the clubs that weren't interested rather than were. Miller's contract expires in 2026, and therefore it is believed there would be a lower valuation to him, under £10 million is the general assumption. And whoever is able to win the race for Lennon Miller will be getting a top talent on their hands, and here's why. Now, in the season just gone for Motherwell, Lennon Miller was ever present, making 32 starts, around 2,800 minutes, which for an 18-year-old is superb, notching 2 goals and 8 assists in the process as well. When compared to other Scottish Premiership midfielders, Miller does sit in the top 5% for fouls drawn. Also in the top 10% for Scottish Premiership midfielders when looking at assists, although he also does have undeniable quality off the ball. Miller averaged 1.38 interceptions per 90 and an astonishing 6.52 recoveries per 90. Therefore, he seems to be a player that can handle a really intense style of football, and it's why he could be really suited to top clubs around Europe. The young Scot is a really versatile midfielder. He's able to play in the 6, in the 8, and further forward in the 10. His ability to get on the half turn really does suit him to an 8 position. However, as I've mentioned, his defensive prowess also lends himself to the 6, and his creativity allows him to play in the 10. So therefore, any club that does manage to pick him up would be getting a complete midfield package. He recently made his Scotland debut and really did impress, specifically in his first start, which was against Liechtenstein. In that game, he grabbed an assist and also posted strong stats such as an 82% pass accuracy, 5 key passes, 10 of 15 ground duels won, and he was dribbled past just once. Now, I'm going to show you some clips of Miller in action, starting with this one against Kilmarnock. So Miller plays the ball into midfield, and immediately he's thinking about where he can move to next. He continues his run forward as Motherwell look to keep possession and manipulate play. You can see just how intelligent this movement is from Miller as he moves himself from an 8 to a 10. And as the ball is moved forward, he finds himself in an ideal position between the backline and the midfield to pick the ball up. His intelligence here is evident as he lets it run across his body and into space, and then does really well to draw the foul, and the Kilmarnock player does get sent off. Now here's a clip that really showcases Miller's positional awareness and his eye for a pass. Now, as you can see at the beginning of this clip, most of the Motherwell players look pretty disengaged and waiting for the ball to be played around the back to make a lead. However, Miller is switched on and sees that there is a big gap in midfield, as seen here. He makes a quick lead into that space and demands the ball to feet, and then he's able to bring a little bit of flair out and flick it round the corner to the Motherwell forward. Now, at that point, it would be easy just to watch the attack play out as Miller has done his bit, he's moved it through the lines and has formed an attack. However, Miller is so switched on to this that he's able to continue his run and receive the ball back. What this has done is it's lured the defenders in to collapse onto the striker, creating space for the Motherwell player furthest forward in behind. Miller recognises this and therefore realises there must be space to play a ball in behind. And that is exactly what he does here. First time ball into the feet of the Motherwell player, who does put it into the back of the net. And this clip is from Miller's first Scotland start against Liechtenstein. Initially, Miller is just tracking his man in midfield, but a heavy touch from the Liechtenstein midfielder calls him into action. Miller recognises that the touch is heavy enough for him to step in and win the ball back for Scotland. What you'd often expect here is for the player to get between the opposition and the ball, therefore securing it and winning possession for his team. However, Miller pulls out an audacious flick over his opposite number and instead keeps play moving forwards. And this clip just showcases Miller's dynamism entirely. He's not the sort of player that will just win it and play it backwards. He's looking to be on the front foot and progressive and get the team up the pitch. Now, I'm sure by now you're starting to get the picture that Miller is a top talent. So, how does he compare to some of the top talents that are either coming through now or have already emerged as players on the world stage? I've put together a table comparing Lennon Miller to Pedigree, Martin Zubimendi, Angelo Stiller, and Adam Wharton. It also does have to be considered that Miller is playing in a weaker league in the Scottish Premiership though, although there are interesting comparisons to be made. Out of the 5 names in this table, Lennon Miller sits joint first for assists per 90 with Angelo Stiller of 0.26. However, the Motherwell man does just pip Stiller for goals and assists per 90 with 0.32 to his 0.3. When looking at shots per 90, Miller does sit far and above the other names in this table with 1.48. Now this could be because Lennon Miller can play as a 6, 8 and a 10, and the names predominantly in this list are 6s and 8s. However, that does make this stat even more impressive. In tackles won per 90, Miller sits clear, 1.22, the close second being 1.12 of Martin Zubimendi. And finally, when looking at fouls drawn, Miller also tops the pile with 2.28 fouls drawn per 90. Now, there's suggestions that Miller could move to Italy, and it could be a good move for the Scottish midfielder. He would have some of his compatriots there as well. Scott McTominay, Billy Gilmore and Lewis Ferguson have all shined in the Italian top division. Also, looking away from midfielders, Che Adams is playing up front for Torino. There is also some history with Scottish players playing in Serie A, with Graham Souness and Dennis Law both playing in Italy. Now, whether that has a big impact on Miller's decision or not is yet to be seen. It could be quite interesting if Miller is the next Scot to move over and play in Serie A. Now, Lennon Miller already does have great pedigree in the game. He won Scotland's Goal of the Year in 2021 for a goal from the halfway line against England under-16s. In that game, he played against fellow Wonder Kid midfielder Archie Gray. His father, Lee, was also a professional footballer. He was a striker and played for Scotland 3 times. Given that Lennon is already on 2 appearances for the Scottish senior team, you would assume that he will surpass that pretty quickly. His dad did also play for Middlesbrough, Aberdeen, Dundee United and Bristol City, scoring 46 goals in the Scottish Premiership over the course of his career. Now, despite being just 18, Miller has showed great leadership qualities and maturity. When fellow Scottish debutant Kieran Slicker had a bit of a horror debut, Miller came out and spoke on the matter, saying it was Kieran's first cap too, a proud moment, although of course you don't want to concede 3 goals. But there are experienced players in there who will get right behind him, plus others like myself who have been with Kieran in a few camps now and who will support him. He's a good goalkeeper, he showed that all week in training, he just needs to get his head up. Therefore, Miller clearly has a good head on his shoulders, but also he does have confidence in himself. In March, he revealed that he thinks he can be the best player in the Scotland team within a matter of months. His exact quote really does just exemplify how much self-confidence Miller does have, saying, "I'm obviously not going to go in and be the best player there, but I believe that I could maybe, in a couple of months, be the best player there." I think that's how you need to think as a football player. You need to want to be the best. And when comparing him to fellow under-18 midfielders, Miller arguably is the best. He sits first for long passes completed, progressive passes and interceptions, second for shots blocked and assists, third for through passes completed, expected assists, shot assists and goals and assists, fourth for passes to the penalty box, aerial duels won, and expected assists per 100 passes, and fifth for forward passes, passes to the final third, and fouls suffered. Now that is seriously a lot of categories to be in the top 5 under-18 midfielders in the world for. And his strong performances has garnered a lot of attention and praise for prominent figures. Scotland manager Steve Clarke clearly thinks highly of Miller and also offered him some advice. Clarke highlighted Miller's potential to follow in the footsteps of players like Scott McTominay and Lewis Ferguson playing in Serie A, noting that Miller has the talent to succeed abroad. He emphasised the importance of securing regular first-team football to aid his development. Now, it would be interesting to see where Miller would get this first-team football. You'd assume he wouldn't start for clubs like Aston Villa, Newcastle and Liverpool. However, at clubs such as Bournemouth, Brighton, Borussia Dortmund, Celtic and Rangers, they all could be really realistic options for him. Now, Miller's future is still up in the air. Countless clubs have scouted him, but none have made concrete approaches to try and bring him to their respective clubs. However, I would anticipate that when one club makes their move, it could entice a bidding war. A bidding war could be great for Motherwell, as Miller's seemingly inevitable departure looks set to smash their current record sale of David Turnbull for £3.5 million. He's definitely going to be one to watch this summer. I've had my eye on him since last season, where a couple of clubs were interested, but this summer definitely looks like to be his time to move. Now, with all this being said, thank you so much for watching right until the very end. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and also comment just how high you think Lennon Miller's ceiling is. Thank you. Goodbye.